My story is called I, Adam.
Ooh, yeah.
Eternity is a word that few really understand. Or, to put it more accurately, most comprehend it merely as a mental construct, a concept, and concepts can be quite flawed. Eternity is a perfect example. Everyone says they understand what it means, but it is something that cannot be demonstrated, and thus can never be truly understood or defined. If time is infinite, no human eye will ever witness its end. No human hand will ever delineate its boundaries. No human mind will ever truly conceive of its implications. I alone, perhaps, inextricably bound to this cold, dead rock hurling through the vaulted chambers of endless space, might boast a unique appreciation for eternity. Indeed, one could say I am eternity manifested. But there are still many questions, many mysteries that remain locked even to me. But I'm already getting ahead of myself and rambling. An amateur's mistake, or perhaps a cunning, though admittedly unwitting literary device to begin my narrative in medias res. But again, I deviate from the point. I must strive to be more concise and deliberate in my writing. Existence may or may not be infinite, but these meteoric walls on which I scrawl most definitely are not, and the act of carving each letter demands much from me. Let us regress to the beginning then, or as near to it as we may. I am old. Indeed, I would imagine as old as the earth by now, or perhaps even older, but we shall come to that in time. As far as I can tell, I have been since the dawn of humankind. The truth is, I do not know exactly how long I have been alive. When you have been alive as long as I have, the details of your past begin to grow indistinct, much like the delirium of the insomniac, blurring the lines of perception and rendering reality without precision or purpose. I recall no father or mother, though there have been many to play those roles through the ages. I do, however, have a vague sense of being that precedes my first concrete memories, which present themselves to me in flashes of imagery and other nebulous sensations rather than any clear recollection. My growth, my mental and moral development have been mirrored in the development of mankind, in the very rise of human civilization. I find it entirely plausible to imagine that, existing before the advent of any sophisticated means of analysis or articulation, the exact nature of my origins would remain vague to me. I feel I must have looked on the universe even then with a sense of profound awe, but I could not have possibly expressed the admiration in any coherent way, nor could I have assigned any meaning or significance to what I saw, heard, tasted, felt. And so, my nascent years are to be forever lost to me, behind a veil of obscurity whose integrity I can only hope to pierce in the most sporadic and imperfect of ways. Suffice it to say, then, that I am indeed very old, and by all appearances immortal, for lack of a better term. My first distinct memories spring from my days of farming in that fertile crescent that we would have called Iraq, and before that Mesopotamia, nestled securely between the Tigris and her counterpart. Even as early as then I had no family, for I must have already outlived my natural kin, if I had any, if indeed I ever had any. I do not have the space, though I certainly have the time, to relate every particular of my long and sordid history, so I must satisfy myself with the highlights. I remember those days were very hard but happy. Though I did not have a family, there were those with whom I lived, loved, loathed, and labored. If I had a wife in those days, I do not remember her, though certainly there were women in my unnaturally long life. But here is not the place to mention them, and they have, alas, also been left behind in the fog of the distant past. The names of all my oldest friends and lovers have long since vanished from my memory. But there were other names thereafter. There was Gilgamesh, it is even so, though he was surely no god. There was Moses and Abraham and David, also Theseus and Hector, and Caesar and Hitler and Lincoln and 1,000 other names from countries and cities, with names more varied and numerous than the very stars which now surround me. I loved them all, but the longer I lived, the further distance I became from humanity, and soon I began to love them not as my own, but as one might marvel at the machinations of a colony of bustling ants. But their names I will cherish even until the end. Ah, names! I've forgotten to give you mine. My first name I don't even remember, but I've had many names since. Perhaps you should call me Adam, an appellation I ironically bestow upon myself upon the destruction of the earth. I will stand forever, unknown, unlauded, unheard, the first and last of my kind. Now I do not claim to be the first Adam of Edenic origin. No, though surely that mythology would be lost on any I could ever hope to read this. As far as I know, no such man ever existed, nor, so far as I have seen, does the God who made him. I have seen many things, and I can tell you the more incredible stories of any religion I have ever known are mostly bunk anchored on tidbits of truth, the mold that grows from the single particle of rotting food. No, there is no thing in the universe I have seen that could be termed a god, though I have at times fancied myself a deity of the lesser order, immortal, but by no means infallible or omnipotent. Of course, these are vain musings leading nowhere, but even now I sometimes find it seductive to imagine myself among the ranks of the imperfect pantheons of pagan tradition, fully endowed with magnificent longevity, but otherwise open to the limitations and vices of human nature. Yes, I find it very pleasing to think myself a god of life, or of time perhaps, all-powerful in the face of death, but otherwise doomed to eternal impotence on this shard of intergalactic debris. But my narrative has again wandered from its intended course. And yet, I cannot but meant to have written this, for my medium allows for little whim. I have been alone for ages, surely, and my loneliness leaves me vulnerable to distraction and self-absorption. Indeed, there is little else but myself and my accursed condition left for me to consider. But no, I am no god. I do not know what I am. I know not the explanation for my unnatural longevity. I made no bargains with one-dimensional devils. I drank from no mystic pools to earn this terrible gift. I am at best simply an inexplicable anomaly, like the sex-changing Orlando, treading in my solitude through the howled annals of history. In truth, I gave up trying to explain why or how I am centuries ago. I have ceased to care, nor do I think it likely that there is yet a way to divine any answer to that question. I am far more interested in what lies in my future. The general supposition is that time and existence are infinite, ill-equipped though we humans may be to fully grasp them. However, there is a line of thought, and I have had ample time for this kind of rumination, that intrigues me endlessly. In the time before the Earth was destroyed, humanity had plumbed the history of its universe to find the suggestion of a singularity, a single moment in existence where all of the physical universe was triggered into being. Past this moment, we had no hope of gauging, no prospect of knowing further. However, it was also suggested that the universe was ever expanding away from the original event, but that someday it would reach its limits and would also then contract, regressing backwards towards the single point of universal origin. Just as I cannot say what came before the singularity, so also I cannot guess what will come after. My hope, though, is that this existence will blink itself out completely like the flame of a candle. My hope is that time is not truly eternal, that I will finally find the peace of oblivion and non-existence. That is the only hope I still cling to after all these endless millennia, for it is the only conceivable way I see of curing my peculiar situation. In my exceptionally long life, I have been stabbed, stoned, submerged in water, engulfed in flames, shot, hung, poisoned, and other sundry means to kill any other man, and yet I have survived. I have witnessed the extinction, or rather near extinction, of my species. I have seen the demise of my Earth's sun, and the subsequent destruction of the planet I once called home, and yet I have survived. I have sailed through the airless regions of space, clinging to a meteor that fate saw fit to place in my path, and there I remain and still survive, without nourishment or reckoning of time, for the human accounting of days and hours and minutes are all relative and based on the revolutions of their now dead sun. And still I remain, and still I survive. I do not know if my hopes are well-founded. Perhaps I will pass through the veil and find a new existence, instead of none at all. Perhaps the Earth's minds were wrong, and their universe will never revert to its initial state. Perhaps as I plummet through the depths of interstellar space, I will come across some new planet, some new intelligence that can engage me once again. But in truth, I do not think I could take that.